So on behalf of the organizers, Transilvania University of Brașov, the Initiative for Useful Anthropology, and the Applied Anthropology Network of EASA, we would like to thank you all for being here.
Allow us to be your host today. I'm Mihai Burlacu from Transilvania University, basically in one of its labs now.
And I'm Ana Berza from the Initiative for Useful Anthropology. That's Inițiativa pentru Antropologie Utilă in Romanian, the official name.
Even though this year presented us with a lot of challenges, I think it is fitting that we end it with an event about the relevance of teaching anthropology, not only for future anthropologists, but also for those that need it in other fields of activity. We think that anthropological skills and perspectives can be essential in times of crisis, helping us understand the world a little bit better.
Okay, but you know, like with a lot of challenges come a lot of opportunities too. The fact that we are meeting now online allowed us to open this event for international participation, as we already saw in the chat. And we're grateful for having you all here today. So welcome everybody, thanks for joining us. And let's see some guidelines for today. I think you already know them, you're also very familiar with Zoom. But we will kindly ask you to mute yourself during the presentations, and if you can stay with the camera off so that we have a good connection. We will have Q&As after each presentation, but we will ask you to write the questions in the chat. You can do that also during the presentation, and the moderator will collect all your questions and then ask them to the speaker after the presentation. You will be able to ask live questions with your mic open during the panel, during the second part of the panel, so to say. And let's see today's programming. Hi.
Yeah, the three speakers from today's program will each reveal a facet of what anthropology and applied anthropology entails and the challenges of teaching applied anthropology. Each speech will be followed by a 10-minute Q&A section. Please write your questions in the chat section, and one of the moderators, probably for each of the speakers, will read them, and at the end will address those questions.
Okay, our three speakers that we are very honored to have today are Ioannis Manos, Petruța Tempo, and Michelle Dolan. After their presentation, we will have a 15-minute session of networking in breakout rooms, so in smaller groups, followed by a 15-minute break. And after the break, the three speakers will be joined by Alexandra Gera. She's a recent grad that is currently working in the industry, and we will all have together a discussion panel.
Yeah, let's just jump right in. Our first speaker, Dr. Ioannis Manos, is an associate professor of social anthropology at the Department of Balkan, Slavic and Oriental Studies at the University of Macedonia in Thessaloniki, Greece. He studied history and archaeology at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and social anthropology at the universities of Hamburg, Germany, and Sussex in the UK. He worked as a full-time visiting research fellow at the Sussex European Institute. He's also a co-convener of the EASA Teaching Anthropology Network and a member of the editorial board of the Teaching Anthropology Journal, of course, of the Royal Anthropological Institute. He's also a founding member of the academic network Border Crossings, member of its advisory board, and co-editor of its publication series. His main research interests focus on Southeast Europe and include the geopolitical borders and border regions, education, migration, research ethics, nationalism, dance and music, and methodologies of social research. Professor Manos, you have the forum, so to speak.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone that is attending. First of all, I want to express my excitement and joy that I attend this event, and that it's an honor for me to have been invited to as a speaker. I want to thank the organizers for this, and I also want to express my admiration, let me call it this way, for these kind of activities that the EASA, the Network for Applied Anthropology, is organizing. And I hope that we in Greece will soon follow this event. I just wanted to say that I'm very happy to attend the event. I thank the organizers for this, and I express my admiration for these series of events under the title Why the World Needs Anthropologists for all those years now. And I hope that we will follow this example in Greece very soon. Now, let me share my screen where I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation which will help you follow what I will be talking about. Okay, I guess it's fine now. So the title of my contribution today is the one you read on this transparency, Teaching Anthropology to Those Who Don't Need It in Greece, and among other things, providing expertise for professional careers in Greece. These are the topics I will be addressing, an introduction about social cultural anthropology in Greece, and then a few other points. So follow, please, these transparencies. Now, sociocultural anthropology is a recently established and developed discipline in the Greek academia. Its introduction has been part of the modernization process of the Greek society that started to take place after the fall of the military dictatorship in 1974. Modernization in this context should be understood as the process of overcoming everything associated with the Greek state's Oriental, Ottoman, and Balkan past. Although anthropology was first introduced in the mid-1980s, it is in the 1990s that constituted a period of prosperity and growth in terms of the new departments, student numbers, and research. Anthropology has gained status progressively inside university and achieved relative recognition outside university. In addition, ethnography, anthropologists' method, has been increasingly gaining popularity and importance as a conceptual methodological tool and part of a broad-based scientific training in Greece. It is incorporated in interdisciplinary undergraduate and postgraduate study programs. The university has become the predominant institution for both the transmission of anthropological knowledge and training in ethnographic research. Despite this achievement, teaching ethnography in the Greek context primarily concerns anthropologists' potential to present itself and its method as an intervening and engaging force in offering alternative ways of dealing with contemporary issues of society and culture. This has been a very crucial challenge for an academic context, the Greek context, which does not belong to the principal producers of anthropological knowledge, and a country where cultural difference has been strongly politicized and historically shaped by notions of cultural homogeneity. My presentation attempts to raise a number of discussion points about the status and prospects of teaching and learning anthropology in Europe using the Greek case. It draws on a multiplicity of teaching and learning experiences from a broad range of academic and non-academic contexts, which involve diverse audiences with an interest in anthropology and ethnography as part of their academic or vocational training. In my view, teaching and learning anthropology in the Greek context intends to accomplish the following objectives: make anthropology appealing as the study of human diversity, introduce the students to the study of cultural difference, familiarize them with the ethnographic method as the fundamental mode of production of anthropological knowledge, make them transcend their conceptual national boundaries, and produce qualified researchers according to the needs of the job market. Now, in what follows, I outline the current political and socioeconomic context in Greece, which shapes the teaching and learning practices of anthropology. I'm putting an emphasis on these conditions that pose certain limitations in the accomplishment of the above mentioned teaching objectives. And I conclude with some reflections on the prospects of anthropology as an academic field and the path for a professional career. The problem of ethnocentrism. Now, Greek students develop their perception of otherness in an educational system which is strongly shaped by national ideologies which privilege the superiority of the nation and its history. Okay. As a consequence, all efforts to talk about other societies and cultures, different perceptions and ways of human life, distant or close enough, are confronted, at least at the initial stage, by ideas of ethnocentrism. As students enroll at the university, they have no prior knowledge of what anthropology is and what ethnography means. Their perceptions have been shaped in an academic and social environment where sociology and folklore are traditionally thought to be the disciplines that use empirical social research methods. Thus, teaching anthropology and ethnography involves an effort to make students familiar with the study of otherness and introduce them to different forms of living. When undergraduate students are presented in the classes with such questions that do not request factual data, but some kind of interpretation, they fall back on a wide range of taken for granted essentialisms inculcated during their primary and secondary education, along with various forms of geographic, biological, or psychological determinism and assumptions about the nature of progress that increases with civilization. Students resort to cliches concerning the superiority of their civilization and the continuities between the ancient and the modern culture. On the other hand, a number of students appreciate anthropological thinking as a cultural critique. They are attracted to anthropology because they perceive it as a radical, subversive discourse which empowers them to question dominant representations of their society and history, and perhaps to understand the process of their construction and their ideological functions. However, their interest in their own society is not necessarily accompanied by an interest in learning about other societies. Own and other in quotes. Assuming that such knowledge is auxiliary rather than essential to understanding themselves, they are content with reducing the relevance of the cross-cultural perspective to anti-ethnocentric principles. Reflexivity about the nation-state, society, and various aspects of everyday life has been predicated on comparisons between their own country, neighboring former communist countries, and the modern West, as well as on perceptions of the ways in which modern Westerners perceive and evaluate them and their ways, especially since 1990. While for students, ethnography of their own country is relevant because of its subject matter, it is also attractive because it is a part of a modern Western discourse. The idea that the study of others is relevant from the perspective of modern developed societies enables them to construe their own society as not having reached that stage. Talking about otherness and turning students' attention to differences within may entail dangers. Namely, it may reinforce reified and essentialist notions of cultural difference and identity. The idea that refugees, for example, and immigrants are culturally different and that their otherness is both readily discernible and problematic is largely viewed as a self-evident truth. Counting themselves among the majority and situating themselves in the mainstream of social life, students often assume that the cultural identities of refugees and immigrants, minority or local people, are more fixed, unitary, and authentic in terms of social practice than their own. Attributing culture to others empowers one to claim a bias-free, objective perspective and a place in mainstream society, thus undermining the student's tendency to culturalize others requires not only enabling them to question their own assumptions about the nature of cultural identity, but also presenting them with a critical view of the anthropological practice. In the light of the current economic and political context across Europe, successive reforms and laws of the national governments that they have introduced, there's new funding mechanisms and auditing systems that have been designed to render universities more economical, accountable, flexible, and more responsive both to industry and to government itself. To government itself, yes. In a much more demanding way, nowadays, universities are considered as just one of the sites of the public sector that need to be restructured, become smaller and more profitable. The so-called global knowledge economy, where higher education is perceived as increasingly crucial for economic development, is one of the guiding lines. According to the prevailing mindset in Greece, students have hitherto been attending the university education with the purpose of obtaining a degree in order to join the state apparatus and secure themselves a job and a salary for the rest of their lives. Because once you start working for the state, this is a permanent position. The majority of anthropology students and those that enroll in area studies departments, as the one I work, are provided with broad-based academic training. They are expected to acquire a certain set of skills, enabling them to come to grips with a whole variety of professions, and perhaps even to transfer knowledge that teachers have been able to impart to them to wholly different professional fields. This is expected to enable them to cope with the flexibility requirements of today's job market and with the basic imperative of lifelong learning. Yet, there is no state job that is designed to employ people with a specific anthropological education, and there are no positions planned for anthropology graduates in Greece. Thus, students do not even need anthropology. This is the prevailing mindset again, and the ethnographic method for their academic and professional careers, but let alone pursuing a job as anthropologists or social scientists. Now, anthropology is said to be suffering a crisis of relevance, but relevance, of course, is a term that can be vague or confusing unless it is used to ask specifically relevant for whom, or relevant for what, and relevant in what sense. These are some questions that have to be posed in the rapidly changing Greek context, at least, if not everywhere in Europe. Anthropology in Greece is dealing with the difficulty of preserving its status inside the university, achieving recognition outside university, and rendering accessible its knowledge. A large portion of the general public does not even know what anthropology is and cannot place it in a general system of knowledge, as is the case with folklore, history, or sociology. This is not a task anthropology and anthropologists alone can deal with. It involves state policy planning and decision-making, interventions at the level of education policies, and the much debated link between academia and the job market. But in my view, it definitely demands from anthropologists to find creative ways to demonstrate the discipline's potential, that it can produce applicable knowledge and offer expertise in every sector of the society. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Manos. So while we are kindly inviting you to address any type of questions for Professor Manos, I will start by addressing one question that is actually of interest. You were talking about ethnocentrism, and from this point of view, Do you or did you were you interested in the past of the equivalent or the opposite of ethnocentrism, that is the xenocentrism, or the tendency to consider others' cultures to be superior to one's own, particularly in the context of migration, for example? Were you interested, or did you do something regarding this in relation to teaching anthropology?
Would you like me to reply to each answer, or expect others? I mean, I can reply however you feel it's more practical for you.
Well, if you like, you can reply to that,
Okay.
and we will be waiting for other questions.
Okay.
Already, we have one or two questions coming.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. Well, I think this has not been part of the practice and the way teaching and learning anthropology has been approached in Greece, at least. I think part of this problem is what I explained, that nobody knows at the Greek school what anthropology is until one enrolls to university. And there one has to start thinking of a discipline that tries to tell them that, you know what, there's different ways of thinking about ourselves and others, which should be less ethnocentric than the ones we have learned through our participation in the formal education. As you probably know, part of our self-understanding, I mean as collectivities, as entities, as nations in Southeastern Europe at least, and Eastern Europe, but especially in this our area, is this kind of discourse between which takes positions of Orientalist understandings and Balkanist, more concretely, understanding. So it's this part of, are we closer to the West, or are we part of the East? And at least in the Greek context, this is a kind of discussion and a public debate since the mid-19th century, after the establishment of the Greek state. And it is still prevalent, and this is part of the problem which we are trying to deal with when we are discussing teaching practices in anthropology in Greece.
Okay, thank you. Margaret Kritsi is making a small comment and also a question. She's saying the general, and of course, the general perception seems to be that anthropology is situated in the history, looking at patterns, behaviors, and people of the past. And her question is there an anthropology of the future? This is a nice question, actually.
Okay, to the extent that this is addressed to me, let me say, first of all, maybe explain a little more that history and folklore, not only in Greece, but I'm speaking about the Greek case, are very, very much related to the Greek national project, the construction of Greek national identity from the mid-19th century. So, and along with this goes archaeology. So these three disciplines have a very, very strong, public recognition in not only in the public opinion, but also in their status as disciplines in the Greek academia, because they are thought that they stress and they bring up all these elements that should be brought up about what Greekness is at every moment of the recent Greek history. Now, anthropology, part of its late appearance in the Greek context is exactly that it's always critical to those kinds of understandings of culture and identity. And being or living in a state where the stressing of national homogeneity and homogeneous culture is very much a foundation of what is today Greek national identity, then this makes it a problem. Yet, coming to an anthropology of the future, well, what I think anthropology in Greece is trying to do through its teaching practices is actually to say to everyone, we think there are alternative ways of understanding the present, understanding the presence of the past in the present, and of course, then try to design our future. But this is still a very abstract discourse to be posed in relation to the anthropologist's position in the Greek academia.
Okay, thank you for that. Alina Branda is also saying, thank you. Could you please develop more on the difficulties and challenges faced when implementing the domain of social/cultural anthropology in Greece in the mid-80s, both institutionally and individually?
Yes, the first MA program in anthropology, the first appearance of anthropology in the Greek academia was established in 1986 at the University of the Aegean on the island of Lesbos in the town of Mytilene. So it started as an MA discipline. It started as a discipline with some courses scattered across departments with history and sociology. And the first, let me say, pure social anthropology department in Greece was established maybe a little more than 10 years ago in Athens. So practically there are 3 or 2 actually departments where social anthropology is one of the fields. Social anthropology department in Athens and anthropology and history department in the University of the Aegean. And then there are sections of anthropology, like in our department. So still it's a peripheral role of anthropology in Greece.
Thank you for that. Sorin is asking us, since corporations currently play the role of bridging cultures or reculturalizing local employees, how do you see an anthropological approach in studying those environments?
Very beneficial, I would say. Very beneficial. Unfortunately, to the extent I know, this part of or field or branch, if I may call it like this, of anthropology is not practiced in Greece. I mean, we don't have any colleagues studying corporations and this kind of corporate culture, and try also to link this kind of understanding with the practices of these corporations. There are discussions. For example, I have been proposed a few months ago to participate as advisor in a company that will be constructed, which will provide assistance to corporations how to restructure their culture and how to improve their efficiency. Well, I don't know what that means very much. I mean, I know, but I don't know how this would work in practice. So this is only I can say about this in the Greek context.
Okay, thank you for that. So if there is, there is one more question. Adastan is making a short comment. I think in Romania we have the same problem of people not knowing what anthropology is until they enroll in university on this specific subject. And there are university departments like the Faculty of Law, for example, which would strongly need an anthropological perspective, in my opinion. Now the question, do you think anthropology should be a subject of study in faculties that aren't focused on social science? And how do you think this change could come about? So,
well, I guess if you're asking somebody who teaches anthropology this question, of course the answer is yes. I would propose so. But speaking, I mean, having in mind the Greek context and some of the problems I addressed in my contribution earlier, let me give you an example which relates to sociology, but I think it indicates the kind of approach the Greek state in general, regardless of political ideologies and political parties being in the administration. The previous government, which was called, which was a left-wing government of the Syriza party, introduced sociology as one of the fields that pupils or students at the last grade of school should take exams in order to enroll to the university. This was a decision where it replaced Latin language. So in this part of field, students had to take exams in Greek language, in sociology, in history, and no Latin was there. So the new government, since last year, since 2019, has decided to bring back the Latin language, and replace sociology. So the prevailing idea, again, is that pupils or students should not develop this kind of critical thinking as sociology, or even more anthropology, if it could be taught at schools, help them. So we still remain in this kind of understanding where, well, let me call it, it's a conservative approach to this. So if this doesn't change, then I think it's very, very much in only our imagination that we have positions of anthropologists teaching in departments of social sciences, unfortunately, in Greece.
Yeah, there was a discussion regarding the Latvian language in Romania as well. One more question, and I think afterwards we will go to our next speaker. Do you think that anthropology is still too connected to the academy, and is this one of the reasons why it remains a discipline whose enormous importance is hardly understood? But in the end, anthropology is a way of life, not necessarily a discipline.
Yes,
so yeah.
Sorry, Mikhail. Yes, I agree. I completely agree with this. I think a large part of the responsibility, again, addressing this in the Greek context, but I think it's a more general problem anyway, about anthropology, is that the anthropological community has to do more to bring in the foreground its position, its power, its knowledge, and this relates to a lot of other issues which probably are not to be discussed right now. It is how we address public issues. How do we write for public, big publics, or for public discussions? How do we somehow simplify our language? How do we create also this connection with all these sectors where we can show that yes, there are benefits from introducing anthropology to job market and elsewhere. So yes, I agree with this very much, but I don't have the answer.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Now we will go to our next speaker. Anna, please.
Okay, let me introduce you our next speaker. Dr. Petruța Tempo. She teaches at the Faculty of Political, Administrative and Communication Sciences at the Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca, where she has been a lecturer since 2009. She's a PhD in cultural anthropology, taken in 2008, and she currently teaches courses on political anthropology, qualitative methodology, and political sociology. Her research interests include collective memory and urban narratives, formal and informal education in Romania, body and gender discourse, and women's citizenship in communist Romania, women and work. So, Dr. Petruța Tempo, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, I want to thank you, the organizers, and everyone present today for this opportunity, which is quite challenging for me. I mean, having a short lecture on two massive topics, anthropology and gender, and their interconnections. And also thank you for the opportunity of trying to explain to myself, and also to others, what their connection is. And if I may, I would also say that somehow I have this experience of always having to have an answer ready to the question, what is anthropology good for, but also what is gender good for? So putting these two together today is an opportunity, but it's not an easy task. So it has been very complicated for me trying to figure out how to link things and how to make them understandable for a larger audience. So my endeavor today is complicated, first of all, by the extent of the discussion. So both topics are huge. but also by the fact that, as we all know, we live in a world in which professional or academic knowledge is intertwined with lay knowledge, especially under the pressure of the force of social media. So everyone is an expert today. And perhaps no other topic is more permeated with ideology and common sense ideas than that of gender. I mean, we all know what men and women are or aren't, and we all know how men and women are supposed to talk, act, look, right? So everybody's an expert somehow, but then we are not. Because concepts and labels such as gender identity, gender roles, gender fluid, binary or non-binary identity, they are popping up every day in social media. And people think they know that what they are, but they don't. So most people are confused. And the problem is that even experts get confused. And then another problem is that this confusion over definitions and labels is very risky in this case because it has material consequences. People have their lives messed up by these confusions. People get to vote for or against issues based on these confusions. People are included or excluded based on these confusions. So it's really important, and I think it's vital that we try to clarify these issues. And I will try to at least propose some topics for discussion today in my contribution. So the first question that I would like to tackle is a more academical one: what is the role of anthropology? And then a more profane one: what is it good for? And I'm not trying to steal Michelle's topic, but I would just like to say that it's a question that we have all encountered throughout our academic years or careers. So anthropology has started off with the promise of exploring in depth the full diversity of cultural experiences, while at the same time preserving a comparative perspective, which was premised on our shared humanity. So in the quest for understanding and describing otherness, there has always been this underlying assumption that acknowledging human diversity can somehow ease or relax our own fixation with our ways of doing things, our tradition, our culture. So the understanding that somehow we are all in this together, that people living everywhere or people who have lived everywhere on this planet share with us a minimum kit of cultural items, whether it's kinship, religion, social and political management, material culture, and also sex and gender. This understanding is somehow reassuring in itself. So the thought that we all have these things in common, regardless of the fact that they might vary from culture to culture. So first of all, I would like to address the assets, the advantages of anthropology as a discipline. First of all, I think the effort to engage, decipher, describe, and then explain an other culture develops communication and adaptive skills and abilities, and also trains the eye for difference and also a sensibility for context. So fieldwork, as by excellence the method of anthropology, is the best way of training these abilities. And while talking to people is, as we all know, crucial in social sciences, talking and observing and participating in their daily lifestyles is even more. So anthropology is somehow well endowed to observe cultures and understand them. Second, the very skills that we acquire and develop in the interest of fieldwork can be employed also in other fields, along with this sensitivity to difference and detail, especially in our times of global encounters and increased cultural context. So this intensification of cultural context requires from us a certain sensibility and a certain attention and respect for diversity. Third, I think that describing other cultures similar and yet so different to ours, opens up a world of possibilities. So comparison has always been, whether explicit or implicit, an anthropological tool. And while anthropology cannot, and I think should not, offer practical solutions, it can offer alternatives by describing them. So description is also a very powerful asset of anthropology. But perhaps the most important lesson of anthropology, in my opinion, beyond that of recognition and acknowledgement of diversity, is that of understanding cultures in a holistic manner, which means that practices, discourses, behaviors, ideas, concepts, they kind of make sense inside a particular culture as functional parts of it and should not be considered somehow free-floating cultural items. Hence, cultural relativism. And cultural relativism implies that cultures are different and each culture has its specificity and inner logic. So the consequence is that comparing cultures or even hierarchizing them is wrong. And to all these skills and assets, we might also add the ability to understand complexity, the empathy which is required for fieldwork, creativity, flexibility, and abilities of communication that most or the good anthropologists have. Now, how does all this help us better understand gender as, I think, one of the most misused and abused concepts in current debates? Now, first of all, gender has always been a key concept in anthropology. However, in the early works, it was somehow an implicit part of the discussion of kinship, family, men and women relations. And only later, I would say in the 70s, the 80s, women have become the explicit focus of ethnographies as part of the efforts of feminist anthropologies that were seeking to give voice to muted groups. So women were no longer a cultural accessory, a separate category to which some anthropologists, especially male anthropologists, did not have access, but became the main topic of their endeavors. And here I have to mention the study of Sherry Ordner, which was really influential for me when I was younger and I read it for the first time. I'm talking about the study Is Female to Male as Male is to Culture, as Nature is to Culture, that was published in 1972, where she tackles the presumed universal subordination of women by looking at the nature-culture dichotomy and how it overlaps with gender arrangements. And she argues that in most societies, women's bodies and their functions somehow inherently position them as closer to nature and also in more traditional social roles, which are perceived as having lower cultural value than men's social roles. While men, on the other hand, are seen as dwelling with more transcendental jobs associated with the superiority of culture, such as arts, literature, abstract thinking, and philosophy, as we have recently seen in the declaration of the newly elected our senator in Romania. So at this point, gender came to be defined as the cultural translation of sex differences, or more explicitly, the set of expected behaviors, practices, appearances, discourses, and desires that are prescribed for each sex by the society. This definition was heavily influenced, especially starting with the early 50s, by Talcott Parsons' concept of sex roles as part of role theory. The idea that each society defines and prescribes more or less normatively clear and different set of roles for women and men. Unequal and unfair set of roles, feminists added. For example, girls and women are generally expected to be warmer and nurturing and smiling and kind all the time, while men are supposed to be endowed with abstract reasoning, leadership abilities, and philosophical abilities. How these roles came to exist or came to be accepted was also part of heated debates, for instance, the nature-nurture debate regarding to what extent gender roles and their variations are biologically determined, or to what extent they are socially constructed. So, for instance, social biologists would argue that they are a natural development of innate features of each sex, while social constructionists would insist that they are cultural products. As a parenthesis, social constructionism does not entail that these constructions are somehow individual fantasies, but they are formed in society and managed inside the society. Gender roles were also seen complementary with gender identity, which is understood as the subjective assessment by the individual of their own gender. So how the individual assumes this identity, or how he or she feels to be the assigned gender identity. Now, in the happiest cases that were called normality, gender identity and gender roles coincide, but sometimes they do not, and the individual feels a gap between what he or she feels to be and what society requires him or her to be. And recent recognitions of gender identities as spectrum, or an increasing tendency towards non-binary identification, were intended precisely to help these individuals understand and somehow solve their situation. However, it seems that gender identity, understood as complete and absolute flexibility, is prevailing over gender roles, and that the continuous fluidization of labels and identification is throwing everyone into a hopeless relativism, and is confusing even more people who hear for the first time the term gender, as it's the case of the majority of people in Romania. And they hear the term gender for the first time, or they have heard it a few years ago, and they are convinced that it means that anyone can be anything one wants to be. It's also worth mentioning that even if it seems like it's one of the hottest topics nowadays, it's still one of the most speculative, and the boundaries between science and ideology are more and more fragile, which makes the whole discussion even more complicated and the consequences even more complex. Let's return for a moment to good old anthropology, which can provide valuable examples of non-binary gender arrangements. So throughout its history, anthropology has been describing cases of Bardash, or the most recent term, two-spirit people in Indian communities, third gender or hieras, or all kinds of non-binary arrangements. But we have to remember that these gender arrangements make sense in those particular cultures and in no way resemble Western understandings of gender fluidity, as, for instance, native peoples have always insisted that what they understand by two-spirit people is not the same with Western non-binary arrangements. So these are just a few examples of how complex and complicated the discussion can be, even for someone who has been studying and reading on this topic for a lot of years, which is my case. So I would like to close, or to open the further debate with several provoking inquiries. One would be, how do we translate, how do we explain this concept to lay people, to people who hear it for the first time? How can we explain to people with, I don't know, no connection to the academic world, or people who encounter this term in different contexts? For instance, I'm thinking particularly about the Romanian case, where 2 years ago we had a referendum on the definition of the family, and it was for the first time that a lot of people have heard this issue. They have heard about gay marriage, gender, and all these things, and they were completely confused because we didn't have a public debate on these issues. So how do we explain these concepts and also the realities behind these concepts to lay people, to people that are not connected to the academic environment? And also, how can we translate this to cultural context in which they have not been traditionally grounded? Again, I'm thinking about Romania, and I was thinking of a possible research topic. Is there a traditional folklore understanding of gender fluidity in Romania, for instance? Did anyone bother to study this issue? So can we build on something that is already existing? So how much do we know about the understanding of gender differences in the Romanian context, like in the deep mentality of the Romanian context? And one final question, I was asking myself how useful is, after all, anthropology in preaching diversity and cultural relativism without jumping from descriptivism to normativism. So these are a few of my dilemmas and questions that I was thinking about, forced by this by this encounter today, and I would really love to hear your opinions and ideas and to open the floor for a fruitful debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Tempo. We already have one question from the audience. As anthropologists, how do we balance our respect for a community's definition and performance of gender in a given context, and our need to improve the human condition, such as encouraging gender equality or discouraging gender-based violence? In other words, how do we suspend our own biases or judgments and minimize our interference or influence when dealing with aspects of culture that should continue or should change?
It's a very difficult question, or rather the answer is very difficult, and I think as an anthropologist, or most anthropologists have been through this dilemma. I mean, especially when we deal with sensitive issues. I myself did research, and I used to consider myself a feminist, so it's very difficult to do research and actually set aside your own ideas, because as an anthropologist, our purpose is to look into how these people think about a situation or about a cultural aspect or about a certain phenomenon. I can only give you a very short example from my own research. I've been researching in the past few years the idea of citizenship, the idea of gendered citizenship, and I was looking at experiences of women before, during communism and after communism. And it was surprising to me to see that if I set aside my post-communist feminist ideas and look into the real experience of these women who were socialized and raised during communism, it was surprising to discover new values and new ideas that were somehow opaque to my understanding. So those women really valued their freedom and their so-called emancipation in a way in which young women nowadays probably do not. So the idea is that if I manage to set aside how I was thinking about these issues, it was really useful for me to see how my respondents, how my subjects actually coined their own ideas of emancipation and womanhood and femininity and gender relationships and so on. So I think it's valuable to look at the subjective experience of people and then probably insert our own ideas and our own cultural background.
Okay, so you say like our role should be to understand and describe more than to encourage something to change, even if it would fit our personal ideals or values.
I think in the end it's a personal decision how involved you want to be, and then you turn from anthropology to applied research or participatory research or something. Mm-hmm.
As anthropologists, we very often strive to be objective, but is there such a thing as real objectivity or objectivity in applied anthropology?
I myself don't really believe in objectivity in the sense that I think as an anthropologist, we use our own subjectivity to be able to have that empathic understanding of others. But then we have to somehow put our subjectivity on hold to actually have an objective description of that situation, of that cultural phenomenon. So I think it's this difficult interplay between subjectivity on and off to be able to have an objective account of that cultural phenomenon that we are studying.
Okay, that's very true. Are there any other questions from the audience, or can I ask one of my own? I'm just gonna wait a few moments to see. Okay, we have another one.
I like this one.
Do you as a teacher deal with students who have conservative views regarding gender, the way in which society should be? Do you have any story from the classroom that stayed with you? În sensul că de te-a marcat. I mean, yeah, it's good, that stayed with you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I've been teaching a course called Gender Studies for almost 18 years. And it's a course that is taught in the second semester of the first year for the political science students. So imagine the second semester of the first year. So anyone who has experience with teaching in Romania knows that a lot of students are coming in the first year of their university experience with a lot of ideas taken from the family or from their context or from the media. So in the beginning, it's this quite challenging encounter with new ideas for them. And as a teacher or as a professor, it's really engaging for me also. I myself enjoy taking them on, but not in a bad manner. So I joke with them and I try to explain things in a friendly manner. I've never shut up anyone with these ideas. I'm actually interested in seeing how they have formed those concepts and where do they come from, and helping them acknowledge that probably they are not even their ideas, but they have taken them from somewhere, and helping them understand that things can also be different. So again, as in anthropology, as in teaching anthropology and as in teaching gender, I think our mission is first of all to show that there are other possibilities and then let people the freedom to choose. So I would insist on this non-normative role of our sciences, but rather descriptive with an implicit invitation of choosing the right option. And I think it's important, especially for young students, to somehow find their own way. So I don't have right now a clear story, but I always see the difference between first-year students and third-year students. And by the time they get in the third year, they already have more progressist ideas than I have. So I think I'm doing a good job, and I'm really happy when I see this. And I'm happy when I see that they found their own way, and they become involved and they volunteer and they open up their minds and their possibilities. It's really what makes the task of teaching nice and fun. especially fun.
I think that's a really important point, because I would bet that most of these students don't even realize how much they change until there's like a bigger span of time that they can analyze and look behind and think, oh my God, I had such thoughts in the first year and now I've learned so much. But yeah, I would actually, in the classroom, this kind of discussion, open discussion with arguments on both or on all sides usually works. But in our society, how can we have a constructive dialogue in our society about gender or about tolerance, but let's say about gender, because I think that both sides are so hurt in their feelings when the discussion starts, that they cannot have a constructive dialogue anymore, because they are not, they just want to say their part, not listen to what the other has to say. So can we have such a constructive dialogue in the society too?
I have to say that I myself find myself quite worried about this increasing gap between ideas and bubbles and people, and the recent elections in Romania quite visibly showed that there is a bubble of people that we preferred not to know about, the people who voted for the alliance, for instance, and would have these ideas that for the other bubble seem fascist and right-wing and really scary. But what's scarier than that is this increasing gap between how we think. So we are part of the same culture, of the same society, but we are kind of losing even the desire to build bridges or to find points of connection or to have a common dialogue. So people despise each other's ideas and they hate each other, and there's this mutual misunderstanding in the end, because nobody takes the time to actually explain to the other side what is their position and listen to the others.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Yeah, those are questions without real answers. Just
yeah.
Okay, maybe another one. So one of the most, yeah.
There was a question in the chat.
Yeah. One of the most interesting ideas he expressed. Okay.
That's funny in the context. I'm a she.
Okay, she expressed. Maybe there was a typo. I think that was a typo, but yeah. Very funny in the context. So one of the most interesting ideas you expressed is that of considering anthropology as a holistic discipline connected to all other disciplines. Theoretical anthropology is not enough. So anthropology is a daily practice. In a sense, we need to create a collaborative network between university and other social actors. It is necessary to create the connection with the communities, but also with the political institutions. So how do you comment?
I admit I haven't really done my part when it comes to this, but I know that, and it's probably more visible in Bucharest, there are these kind of connections between academic institutions and political institutions and NGOs. And I think probably intellectuals should become more public and should have a more clear voice and actually intervene in these debates and say how things really are, or how things are seen from the point of view of expert disciplines and not from the point of view of Karen on Facebook. So we should probably have a more active voice in these debates. So instead of letting people just argue over issues without knowing what they are arguing about, maybe we should be more involved. But again, I haven't done my part either, so I don't see myself going on public television and talking about these issues. Because the level of aggressiveness at this point is so high that I really, really don't see myself going into these debates.
I think that's a paradox of anthropologists, because we try to be objective, but we also should maybe be more involved in communities as maybe as mediators, or at least as someone that gathers all ideas and just puts them on the table in a way that they maybe have a chance to be understood by multiple actors of the society.
Yes, as mediators, yes.
Do we have any other questions for Dr. Temple? No, I think we can move on then.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Michelle Dolan. She's an applied anthropologist and a member of the Applied Anthropology Network. Michelle studied visual communication in the Limerick School of Art and Design, and ever since has utilized visual methods to observe, engage with, and question the world around her. Living and working in a variety of social and cultural environments led Michelle to the field of anthropology, a discipline she pursued at master's level in Queen's University, Belfast, graduating with first-class honors. This master allowed Michelle the opportunity to combine her passion of visual methods and understandings of the human experience. Currently working as an anthropologist in the field of design thinking and creative problem solving, Michelle is employed by REIC, where she works as an anthropologist, creative facilitator, ideator, tool designer, insight gatherer, data visualizer, and overall dot connector. So Michelle, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mihai, and thank you very much to the team for having me here today. I'm delighted to be with you. I'm just going to share my screen with you, all participants. Here we go. So bear with me one sec. Okay. Okay, so again, sorry, thank you very much, Mihai. It's lovely to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity, and thank you very much, Patricia and Yanis, for your presentations. They were really interesting. I really enjoyed them. So I'm just going to go straight in. I'm Michelle, and this is my dad, Tony. And this is how he looked, and this is the question he asked me when I told him, you know, I'm going off doing my master's in anthropology. He was like, anthro who? As in, like, what the hell is this, you know? And to be honest, this reaction was not uncommon when I started telling my ex-colleagues and my friends what I was going to do next. So I am coming to you this morning from, sorry, I've just lost my mouse. Oh, here we go. Technical kind of, sorry about that. I'm coming to you this morning from Belfast. I haven't always lived here, and I will touch on that as I move through the presentation this morning. But just for now, I wanted to show you this nice little visual of Harland and Wolff cranes, which is where the Titanic was built, by a local artist, James Ash. So today, I'm going to cover three things: my journey to anthropology, finally finding anthropology, and kind of my experiences working within applied anthropology. So imagination has played a really big part in my life. I've really been fascinated with it, and it plays an important role in understanding and bringing about change, therefore helping us to understand how we live or how we could live, and has accordingly been acknowledged as a key topic for anyone who calls themselves an anthropologist. So I'm just going to start off with my journey. And I didn't find anthropology until I was about 28. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know anything about it. And although I was quite late coming to it, I was all the time following something, you know, and it was what this image is saying. You know, I implicitly understood that things were connected, but I just hadn't found the right framework to help me make sense of it. And anthropology really helped me do that. And just before I really kick off on my journey, I just want to start off with a story. So when I was in second class in primary school here, I think I was 7 or 8, I grew up in the west of Ireland, which is quite rural. And back in the late 80s, the early 90s, we weren't doing very well economically. There was a lot of outward immigration and very little inward migration. So we were not a very diverse country, and a very Catholic country at that. But one girl joined our class called Nihalala. She was from India. And we were in our religion class one day, and we were asked to draw a picture of our God. And now, when I looked over and saw what Neha had drawn, this is not an exact representation, but it's similar to what it was. I think my cultural casing just totally cracked. I was just like, oh my God, you know, nobody told me God could be a woman, you know, nobody told me God could wear this amazing pink dress and could have these gorgeous gold bangles. And I think my little 7 or 8-year-old brain just thought, well, you know, if God could be a woman, what else is going on out there that nobody is telling me about? And it was really, you know, from this day on that I began to kind of question everything and not take things for granted, and kind of had an awareness that maybe people don't discuss certain things, or there's certain frameworks that we live within where maybe we're not exposed to different knowledge, you know. So let me see. I always say that my chosen education journey began when I was 18, when I went to study graphic design in the Limerick School of Art and Design. And it was really during these 4 years that I had the opportunity to explore these kind of questions and issues I was thinking about me as a woman in Ireland. And so in my thesis, I looked at the evolving status of women in Ireland and how that was portrayed in the Irish media. And during that research, I went back to the National Library for Teachers, the Teacher Training College, and looked at the early readers that I was exposed to in my formative years. You know, how am I a woman? How do women act? What do women do? And this reader was Anne and Barry. It's a really loved classic reader in Ireland. And you can see it's really traditional roles. You know, Mammy's in the kitchen, Daddy's outside playing football. In other books, Daddy was on the tractor, Daddy was gone fishing. Mammy was always in that traditional role, like Patricia was saying, you know, caring, nurturing. And this is kind of, you know, how we were shaped from a young age. So that was the broader context. And then for my final year project, I decided to look closer to home. And I started asking questions about the life of the women in my family, in my matrilineal side. So my mum's mum, and then my granny's granny. So I created a book called Granny, A Living Link to the Past, where I asked my granny questions about her granny. And then I answered those questions. So it was kind of like three links to the past of experience within our family. And at the time, I did not know this is an ethnographic approach. I'd never heard that word. I didn't know what this was. You know, me and my granny would go out for walks around where she lived, and we'd have chats, because I found that the conversation came easier then. It was more relaxed, it was less intensive. But I was doing walking interviews essentially, which I didn't realize. And so, you know, this is kind of another example of me slowly making my way towards anthropology, still unknowing to myself. So in the years after I graduated, I did what I call wandering with an O and an A. It was a time of a period of about 8 years where I lived and worked in a lot of different social and cultural environments. I had the opportunity to live abroad in different places, and undertook quite a variety of roles, really. And it was really this exposure and the experiences which I got in these places that posed many questions and ultimately led me to the field of anthropology. And just to share one kind of experience from that time, when I was teaching in Dubai, I had a grade 1 class, and of 26 students, there were 17 nationalities. And I was fascinated by this, and I wanted to know more about their experiences. So I created a segment called My News, and it was basically, I don't care what your handwriting looks like, I don't care if you can spell, not that I don't care, but the focus is, tell me a story, tell me something that you did with your friends or your family. And it was really through this exercise that I began to see, you know, when you give someone this opportunity, the power of the voice comes out, their confidence grows immensely, purely by having the opportunity to share their story, to be heard and to be seen. They developed empathy and curiosity, and they really began to understand the importance of their imagination and how it could be a tool in their own learning journeys. And just a little example, this was one of the stories that was shared during My News. It was Amna, who was a 7-year-old Emirati girl, and she told us about her weekend when she went to Dubai Mall with her mom and her aunties for tea. So this is kind of just a little example of that. So when I finally got to anthropology, I was 28, but it took me kind of a couple of years to get the finances and stuff in place so I could actually get back. And I've had lots of conversations with people who've made their way to the field. And Anna had said this when I asked her how she got there. You know, she's like, I wanted to be an anthropologist long before I actually knew what it was. And I think this is really important because, you know, people get there by following their passions, by being curious, by asking questions, but critically, they get there by imagining that there could be a space where these ways of thinking, being, knowing, and understanding can be supported. And also, Alice Waterston at the 2019 Why the World Needs Anthropologists said, you know, when I discovered anthropology at 30, I knew it would never go away. It was an epiphany. And I really felt the same way too. But I must say, I felt a bit cheated when I found out what it was. Because, you know, anthropology is a field that looks at what it is to be human, and it explores all the myriad of ways in which we are human. And that's such a fundamental part of our existence. And so I really struggled to understand, you know, how is this not an essential component of any education system? How am I only finding this out at like 28, you know? Especially when anthropology is underpinned by critical life skills, you know, such as deep listening, observation, deferring judgment, jumping in and giving things a go. And through these things, you develop your empathy, your curiosity, and your imagination. So when I got to Queen's University, I was still really interested in the whole lived experience. And I used this opportunity to kind of bridge my visual past with my anthropological present. So I undertook a project which looked at the social impact of the student lifestyle in the Holy Land. And my aim was to understand the everyday lived experience of diverse groups of residents living within the space. So I looked at students, newcomers, which are asylum seekers and refugees, and at established residents. The theory that I used was space, place, identity, and lived experience. And it was in my methods really that I could bridge the past and the present. So I used sensorial methods and mobile methods and visual methods, participant observation, walking interviews, and photo ethnography. And so after my time at Queen's, moving into the field of applied anthropology, and we all know that there are visibility issues within the field. And this is something I just wanted to touch upon because, you know, why are we invisible? Well, there's a couple of reasons. And some of them are, well, one, first and foremost, you know, there's still a lack of understanding of how anthropology and anthropologists can contribute in many sectors. So that's one factor. Another is that a lot of jobs aren't advertised specifically saying, you know, seeking an anthropologist. They're looking for a social scientist, or they're looking for a qualitative researcher. So in terms of language, we're not very visible. But also in terms of, this is what Alice Waterston had also mentioned, we are part of the problem because we actually don't self-identify a lot of the time. We don't label ourselves as an anthropologist. So as soon as Alice actually mentioned that, the first thing I did was I went to my LinkedIn profile and I first and foremost identified myself as an anthropologist working in these fields, because I feel that fundamentally this is my framework that I operate from, you know. And also another problem is that a lot of the time we have to write our own job descriptions because it's so broad and we apply our skills in so many different ways. And this is my attempt at writing my kind of job description and my bio, because it does encompass so much, and it brings together all of my past experiences in methods and mindset, especially. So as Mihai had introduced me as, you know, I'm a researcher, an insight gatherer, a creative facilitator, an ideator, a tool designer. The list goes on, and I know it can sound a bit long-winded, but this is as good as I've gotten so far at the minute. So when we talk about applied anthropology, I kind of think of it as, you know, it's how we apply knowledge and concepts, methods and thinking from anthropology to address contemporary social, economic or health problems facing communities by facilitating positive change. Now, positive change was something that facilitating positive change was something that I wasn't entirely familiar with. I wasn't too sure how to go about learning how to do that. But my boss, Patricia, who I currently work with, did know. She was part of established networks already in Europe, where she would go do creative problem solving training. And so she signposted me to these networks. And I went off and I did some training. I went to Italy first to the Korea Creativity Conference, where I learned the art of facilitation. It was a 3 or 4 day intensive course. And from there, I met a group of people who work in the International Center for Studies in Creativity in Den Bosch in the Netherlands. And I went there for 1 week that following summer, where we learned kind of more practices in facilitation of group problem solving. And now the training, doing this training is fine, but it's really in the application of it in my everyday life that I learn and I develop, because it's a very dynamic field, and it's an embodied learning as well. So I'm continually learning as I apply these practices in my applied anthropology job at the minute. So getting back to the anthropology, so Professor, excuse me now. Professor Nolan says that, you know, it's not only anthropologists who should be using anthropological thinking, we should all be doing it. And anthropological thinking is fundamentally underpinned by 3 things. So critical reflexivity, which is ongoing introspection; holism, which is like every little thing humans do or experience is intimately interconnected with a much larger whole; and emic ways of knowing, which is basically valuing the insider's perspective. So as I said, I currently work in Rejig in Belfast. It's a human-centred training and consultancy business with creativity at its core. Its mission is to train everyone to use imagination to solve their problems. And our methods, we combine creative problem solving and design thinking, and we actively seek out companies or organizations who are curious and who are looking to work in this way. And that's a really important part of this, actually. And who do we work with? We work predominantly with the community and voluntary sector and the education sector, and we're also doing more work in the private sector now. So in terms of in Rejig, how do we kind of apply anthropology? Well, in terms of critical reflexivity, we'd ask ourselves questions such as like, how does this current project fit in with our mission? How might we improve and strengthen our offering? In what ways can we continue to develop the ways in which we help people to use their imagination to solve problems? And how do we apply the learnings from our previous projects to move forward? In terms of holism, we ask, you know, how might we help clients create meaningful connections with their staff teams and users? How might we connect knowledge within the community? And in terms of emic ways of knowing, we really would ask, how might we develop tools to elicit subjective experience? And how might we help participants access the subjective experience of their users so that they can design or redesign services based on real need? And I know I quote a lot from Anna Kira. I just really like her, I like the way that she kind of describes this field. And she says that products and services should not be designed for people, they should be designed with people. And Anna Kira describes design anthropology as co-creation as a methodology. It's a people-centered approach to design, and organizational change as a mindset. And I suppose that's kind of the anthropology that we would most identify with in Rejig, because this kind of underpins everything that we do. And importantly, she also highlights that, you know, as an anthropology practitioner, she refers to herself as a practitioner, not just an applied anthropologist. I act as a facilitator of change. I'm not the actual change agent. And I think that's actually quite important in this field. So the example that I just gave you was where we are brought in to an organization to gather insights. But this is just another project that we worked on this year where we teach people how to think and work in this way. So we worked on, we designed this live innovation challenge, and we brought together students from Ulster University and Queen's University. We bring in live industry partners who bring in challenges that the teams will work on. The students are brought from a multitude of disciplines. We've had like law, business, history, anthropology. It's quite broad. So we bring in lots of thinking styles and lots of different disciplines, and we put them together. It was an accelerated skills program, and the aim was really to gain for the students to gain a greater understanding of their different thinking styles, to learn how to implement human-centered approaches, and to learn how to collaborate when applying research skills with industry needs. And this project, it's a 5-day project. And the first 2 days are really spent introducing them to their thinking profiles and their preferences, getting them comfortable with each other, preparing them for going out to conduct ethnographic interviews with the clients and the service users. We then gave them 2 weeks to go out to the users to collect their data and to come back. And so once they come back, we help them visualize and discuss their data, to sort and filter it, and to pull out the most relevant insights, to identify the real user needs, and to move into ideation, where they think very widely on ideas which may address the identified needs. So then they select their strongest ideas and they move into a concept development stage. So they would develop 4 concepts, and then their challenge owner returns. They present their 4 concepts, and the client will give them feedback on which they feel is most suitable or to move forward with. So then they go off and they further build this concept for another week or so, and then they present back to the client owner. So even in this process, we learn massively every single time, because people react differently all the time. We've got people from different disciplines thinking in different ways, working in different ways, and it can be quite, it's a dynamic thing, and there can be quite a lot of tensions in this. But it's fantastic because everybody moves through a process. We identify this process at the very beginning so they have an understanding of where they are at. And we also do a lot of exercises, experiential exercises, which conceptually underpin what this process will feel like as you move through it, what change feels and looks like. And it's been working quite well so far. I love working on this project. We're doing another one in the new year, because we learn so much from the students themselves. And just in terms of like an applied anthropology toolbox, I kind of feel that there's a couple of things. There's a mindset, there's frameworks, there's theory, and then there's the personal things that you do in your own life that kind of supplement everything. So I'd like to just move to the frameworks, because within there I've put down environment. And I really just want to draw your attention to environment, because sometimes in this line of work, you really have to find the places and spaces that support these ways of working. It doesn't, not everybody will support it, and it's really important for yourself, to find these spaces and to move towards them, because not every organization is capable of supporting that. And just on that line, I would say, if you find that your ways of thinking and doing aren't supported, just move on until you find it. In the same way of finding the field, find the people who will help you think and know and explore in these ways. But I really feel that mindset is probably the most fundamental important part of this, because it will keep you engaged. And speaking of mindset, Dan Pojed, who's one of the founders of Why the World Needs Anthropology, I love this. He says, it's not just a profession, it's a movement and a mindset. And I really do, that really resonates with me. But I would also add, it's where all the best bits of life, curiosity, imagination, creativity, and passion are actively encouraged and rewarded. And in my own experience, this has helped me to live a life which has been endlessly enriched and just full of learning. So I just want to leave you with this. It's one of my favorite paintings by Monet. It's from his series in the early 1900s, where he did a lot of paintings of London in the fog. And I just because it kind of as a metaphor kind of sums up this entire presentation. I begin as an unknowing anthropologist. I end this presentation as an unknowing anthropologist. But the tools, the mindset, the theory, they're all like a toolbox which will guide you through this fog. You'll start at a space of unknowing, but you'll move through and you'll reach new understandings. And that's fundamentally what I love about anthropology. It's like I'm always learning. So I hope that you've learned something from this, and I hope that this presentation has been of use to you. And I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time today, and thank you very much to the team for supporting us this morning.
All right, thank you very much for a very powerful presentation, Michelle. We already have a couple of questions. Simon has a question for you regarding the problem of visibility. He is asking, isn't there also the problem still of what Clifford Geertz called epistemic hypochondria, or the fact that we think that we as anthropologists should not profile ourselves, or that we keep on thinking that there's always something wrong with our discipline?
something wrong with the discipline? Well, I suppose maybe I don't have those concerns about there's something being wrong with the discipline, because I made my way there so slowly that by the time I got there, I kind of knew this is what I needed to be able to articulate experience and ways of being and living. So maybe this idea of inferiority is stemming. I don't have a very academic background as such. I come from the art world, where more conceptual ways of thinking are invited and accepted. So maybe I don't have the constraints of like an academic kind of not an inferiority, that's not the word I'm looking for, but just maybe, you know, imposter syndrome or something. Does that make sense?
Well, if you want, Simon, you may continue with a follow-up question. In the meantime, Lian Kwa is asking, can anthropologists be the agents or be the change agent, or does that depend on the specific field of work?
Can they be the change agent? I think it depends, like, because I know even in my experience here, we are a two team in Rejig, and we focus primarily on gathering the insight that will help create the change. And we fundamentally couldn't spend time being, you know, finding insights to create the change and creating the change. Creating the change is a huge role, and it really has to come from a person who's got already some established power, who's got the ears of people in higher positions, and who's got a voice that people will listen to, someone who can grab the ears of people. So I think it's really important that there is intensive research done to help support the person maybe who can access those areas or those worlds, because maybe our time is spent better. I know as a two-team person, our time is spent better on the gathering of the insights and then actually actively looking for that right person who can disseminate these insights potentially, who has that voice.
All right, thank you. Monica Geller is congratulating you for an amazing presentation. I would like, in the meantime, to please, if you have other questions, address them via chat. I would also like to address your question. Now, you have described your the way you arrived at anthropology like sort of becoming. So for someone that is not necessarily a student in anthropology, perhaps he's doing something else, perhaps he's interested in training in anthropology, not necessarily in academia. What would be the 3 or 4 elements he should bear in mind when trying to approach this domain, this discipline, this way of life, from your point of view?
In my own experience, I think it's really about I think listening is a huge part, learning to listen. And this is something that we focus quite a lot on in our programs, is helping people learn to listen. Listening with your eyes, listening with your ears, listening with your body, because it's a totally embodied skill. And the way in which you listen shapes the way in which you're receiving information and what you're identifying as important or key, or, you know, it's being able to identify the nuggets when they're in front of you. And it's really by eliciting stories that you get access to these nuggets. So we'd really focus on the practice of listening. I would also say, in terms of if you're curious about the field, it's ways of looking. You know, how do you look at things? It's been, in my experience, it's been really looking and listening are the 2 fundamental things about developing the mindset. And the thing is, with this mindset, it's not just an anthropological thing. You can apply this to every aspect of life: project partners, professional development, personal relationships. It's a tool set for growth in all areas. And just in terms of learning to look and learning to listen, I would kind of say podcasts. Expand your width in podcasts. I find them fascinating, things that I know nothing about, that I've never heard of. Easy access for free, which is great while you're walking or just chilling out. In terms of reading, especially, but a lot of my learning as well comes from conversations with friends who work in very different fields. They work in very different ways, and like, oh wow, I would never have thought. Like, what would happen if I applied that to what I'm doing? Where could that take me then? So it's kind of always being curious about how are other people doing things right now, and in what ways can I apply that to the work that I'm currently researching or working on, projects I'm working on.
We have several comments. So Simon is thanking you for the answer, and it is indeed more a concern of critical anthropology as opposed to applied anthropology. But if there's no concern on your part, please keep on going. And now Liane Kwa is also saying that I'm comfortable with being the change agent, but it seems that a lot of anthropologists aren't due to ethics. So I often get the impression that I have to defend myself making changes in the lived environment. Of course, George Agiropoulos is congratulating you for your presentation. And we have a question from Kika Barreto. When you work as a facilitator in, say, design thinking or ideation sessions, have you found specific strategies on how to convince stakeholders or members of the group on how to challenge some of their assumptions, under quotes? Could you tell us about some of your main learnings in this sense? And of course, thank you, Michelle.
Those programs that we do, where we bring in different organizations come together, 5 different organizations, and within their teams there's very different thinking styles. So how do we mitigate against kind of backlash or removing people from their own biases? We start off where we help them understand their own thinking preference, so that they understand first of all, they fundamentally understand their team. And that's a really important part, because this develops empathy within the team. So they understand that maybe at a certain stage of this process, somebody's going to kind of drop back and maybe look disinterested, whereas in fact they're not. They just don't have a preference for this stage. They will probably come back in at a later stage with much more energy. So that's fundamentally setting the scene of understanding each other and having empathy for each other. When we move into the ideas, was that Kiki's question? What happens trying to move people from their biases? Before we move anywhere near ideas, the group have gone out to their users. We have spent quite a lot of time on this learning to listen, helping them shape the questions that will elicit the stories using open question stems. We get them to practice the questions on each other so they can understand what happens when you ask a closed question, what happens when you ask an open question, and the difference in the response. So we spend quite a bit of time in that process. We also give them the opportunity, to practice on each other. So before they even go anywhere near their user, they spend quite a bit of time being comfortable in themselves, going and asking the right questions. So when they come back, they're quite committed at this stage. So they go out actively knowing not what they're looking for, but how to ask what they're looking for, and also armored with the question stems. So by the time they come back, they have quite a bit of data. And we spend half a day or 3/4 of a day going through all this data, visualizing it, getting it up, analyzing it, pulling it apart, figuring out what are the key insights that they're looking for, and then they move to ideas. So by the time they get to ideas, they've spent quite a bit of time looking at this, thinking about this. So they have explored quite a lot of their biases in the visualization of the data. They've had the opportunity to have some conversations, have some debates, have some discussions, and we really leave the time for that to be allowed to happen. So when they get to ideas can be quite tricky, because not everybody has a preference for ideation. Coming up with ideas, some people really, really struggle with that. And we spent a lot of time, and we do a lot of exercises where we're stretching imaginations, we're stretching brains. And it's really about setting a safe environment, because people feel, these are all professional people, they feel a bit threatened, they feel a bit embarrassed, they feel a bit stupid sometimes by engaging in some of the activities. But the creation of a safe environment is fundamentally the most important thing that we do. And we do that from the second they come through the door, through language, through music, through conversation and dialogue, through getting to know each other. So all the time you're facilitating this safe space, which allows for these ways of working and allows for these biases, to have those conversations about the biases, to understand that that's not being ignorant, it's a part of this process, and that it's an essential conversation that you have, and creating the spaces for those conversations. So I hope that kind of makes sense, Kika.
Kika, if you want to, you may very well address another. Oh, she's thanking you. Also, Monica Geller has a short comment. People think in stories, so this is exactly the role you have an anthropologist, to dialogue with people and listen to their stories. I think this is more of a comment. If anybody else has any other questions, please, you may address one or two questions in the chat. From my point of view, it is important to emphasize this element that when we talk about teaching applied anthropology, it is also important to talk about it not only within academia, but outside academia. Well, apparently there are no other questions. Thank you very much, Michelle. Okay, so we can reconvene.
Okay, I hope everybody is ready. Yeah, so we had a few problems with the breakout rooms because some of the participants left the Zoom chat right before, but I hope everybody could have a nice discussion and maybe exchange some contacts. So welcome back. We will now start the discussion panel, and for that I want to introduce you a new speaker, Alexandra Gera, who agreed to join us for this discussion. And thank you, Alexandra, for that. Let me introduce you, Alexandra. She studied ethnology, cultural anthropology, and folklore at the Faculty of Letters in Bucharest. And after that, she pursued a Master of Arts in Anthropology at the National School of Political and Administrative Sciences. She graduated in 2019. Her research focused on how the memory of migrants plays a role in the reconfiguration of urban space. She has described the way in which memory, space, and migration shape the symbolic geography of a city. And after graduation, Alexandra Gera started to work in market research, being interested in consumer behavior and the cultural context that comprises it. I will invite her now to make a short introduction to the panel, so to say. Alexandra?
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. I did have some issues with the internet connection. Thank you so much, Anna, for introducing me, and thank you so much for inviting me to join these wonderful speakers. I'm really honored to have heard each one of you. Well, as Anna said, I started my journey with anthropology in 2014 when I had to choose a university and a study program. And things were a bit blurry back then regarding anthropology. It wasn't as known or popular as it is today, fortunately. So after graduating from the University of Bucharest, I was very focused on the theoretical approach of anthropology. I did have some fieldwork experiences, the practice that they offered in the university, but it wasn't very, long-term or definite or very complex. It was more of a short 1 day, 3 days experience on the field. So back, at this point, after finishing my BA program, I thought that an anthropologist has to, observe and just take notice of what happens in the society, and then write about that, and that's it. So I had this theoretical perspective of anthropology. And then once I started my master's in, at the National School of Political Studies, there I had a different kind of perspective. I remember that one of the first classes held by a very, dear professor of mine called Vintila Mihailescu. I remember that he said that anthropology is the exercise of curiosity. So being an anthropologist is constantly putting effort into remaining open and curious about the world around you. And then he also said that, anthropology is sort of split at this point in two. Some that take notice and see what happens around them and write about it, and then let the information flow and have its own course, in the world. And others that become involved in translating that information into practice. So he talked about this distinction between theoretical anthropology and applied anthropology. And for me, this transition towards applied anthropology was something that gave so much meaning to the things that I was seeing. As Anna presented, I am very interested in the issues that regard migration and how, the life of migrants takes place in a foreign city and what they contribute, what they bring to that city. So once I learned that anthropologists can also get involved and can embrace the empathy that they should have and not just, pretend to be objective, as has already been mentioned, it was so much more meaningful, the fact that I could, talk to these people and interact with them and maybe change something in what concerns their issues here. So from my perspective as the receiving end of teaching anthropology, so as a recent grad, working with NGOs is definitely one of the greatest opportunities that anthropologists have in Romania, at least at this point, because it really gives them the chance to interact with communities that they want to help or that are in need of a mediator, a facilitator, as Michelle said, that can, help them solve a lot of the issues that sometimes they're not aware of. This has been a challenge for me personally, interacting with people and trying to help them see a bit of a, perspective, let's say, without dictating them or without pushing ideas artificially into their minds. So for instance, to give a concrete example, I was working with a community that had a lot of housing issues and a lot of squatting around, a lot of abandoned buildings that were illegally lived by people that didn't have a shelter or were very poor. And people were so used to this phenomena that they didn't really see the need to help those people living in abandoned buildings. They just took them as part of the overall scenery, the overall image of the neighborhood. So sometimes it is very difficult to actually talk to people and try to get to the bottom of a problem without telling them that this is your problem. That has been a very tricky thing for me to do, and something that is definitely not learned in an academic program or throughout the years of study. How to talk to people, how to make them tell you about their problems even when they're not really aware of them. And then another issue that I would like to speak about is empathy. It is very difficult to manage this kind of empathy that you're taught during your school years as an anthropologist. You're always told that you must be very understanding and open and be like a pot that people can just bring ideas or customs or habits or all that together so that you can observe them. And obviously you tend to empathize with different kind of issues. As someone said in the comments, it is very difficult to draw the distinction line between what you should just notice and what you should help or where you should interfere. And managing empathy is very difficult and can be very draining at some point when working as an anthropologist. So definitely that's something that I think it should be spoken more about in especially in university programs, how to draw boundaries and how to help as an anthropologist without emotionally draining yourself. And this sometimes when working with, for instance, this specific case that I am interested in, the migrants, the refugees. There were stories about discrimination, about illegal things that authorities do to these people. And it's very hard to just hear about this and write about this and not do anything afterwards with the information and not send it anywhere or follow it through to actually change something. And then now, as Anna mentioned, I made a transition towards market research, which is another opportunity in Romania for anthropologists, with a distinction that when working in market research, I feel like there is a more control, or let's say the clients that order these studies of the market have more control on your work as an anthropologist. You no longer have the liberty to approach people and let them tell you about their lives and about their stories and their histories. You are definitely kept on the track because you have to fit within a time frame, which is a very important distinction between anthropological research in academia and market research. The methodologies, even if they're pretty similar, you do focus groups, you do interviews, you always have to fit them within a frame. And I find it very challenging because sometimes people have a tendency to open up, especially if you create a safe environment for them. So they become relaxed and start telling you a lot about their lives, about their personal issues. And it is very difficult to make them stop and get back to a subject that you are interested in. Let's say how they buy their shoes, how they choose their shoes, or what stores they buy. They will start telling you about their sick child, or about their, the poverty that they're in sometimes, or different kind of issues that have really emotional meaning to them. And then you have to sort of cut them off and say, let's go back to talking about shoes. So that was a challenge for me, again, to try to manage this empathy that as an anthropologist one should have, and not let it, let's say, dominate discussions, but also not be completely out of the question, so that I appear as insensitive or as focused completely on just something that is mundane, let's say. Yeah, so this would be my notes so far. That would be my observation. I don't want to talk too much because I know there's a panel, so we have to fit within a time frame, as mentioned. So yeah, that would be my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alexandra's speech, I think, is an inspiration for our discussion, for our following discussion. And I will begin it by addressing a couple of questions to our presenters, but I would like to invite you to do the same afterwards and activate your microphones and ask questions and discuss the elements presented here. I would like to address the first question to Yanis. From your experience, from how you have seen anthropology evolving, and we did, and I had the pleasure to collaborate with you in several elements like this Konica Summer School, and not only that, what do you think are the most important challenges, let's not call them threats, but challenges to current day anthropology, not only in academia, but also outside it? If you like, you can, of course.
Yes, I was just noting down also your question, apart from the impressions and thoughts that Alexandra's contribution made me think. Well, I think it's a very large question in any case, challenges, but I'm trying to frame what we are saying today here and what I'm listening by all the colleagues and anyone who is asking questions. I think this is an issue that, well, to my understanding, is to a greater or lesser extent very broad in Europe, at least. How to combine this kind of theoretical and academic teaching and learning with ways of having skills to use them in many reasons. Either if this is going to be just a kind of intervention through participation in an NGO for migrants or refugees, for example, or how this can be applied, as Alexandra told us, in doing surveys and focus groups for specific corporations who want to produce specific products. I don't think I can answer this question in the sense that it's again a complex issue. I could just maybe share our effort here in my department specifically, which is an area studies department, not an anthropology department, where we have changed our curriculum, and we're trying from this year on, starting from the first year students, we have created a major and a minor in anthropology, or in anthropology and cultural studies, where we try to delineate a little more the field. And then we try to find ways, at least in the Greek context, as I say, to combine this kind of theoretical understanding and teaching and learning with sections where one can use, can work, can understand him, herself as working there. For example, cultural activities, museums, NGOs, and we try to bring connections, bring people from there in order to start making our students thinking how they can do this. But this sounds theoretical, and it's only the beginning at the moment. So another thing is the effort you mentioned about the organization of summer school, the one we had in Konica, for example, since 2006. It's again an effort to try to show the potential of ethnography to different disciplines as a one choice, as an alternative method to study various issues. Okay. Maybe I can stop here and give the space to the others, and I'll come back.
Thank you very much for that. Petruța, I would like to ask you another thing. As we both know, there was this tendency both in Poland and Hungary, and now there was a proposal in our parliament to bring about a new law which basically forbid talk about gender studies, including at university level, including in the case of anthropology. And for me, teaching anthropology, applied anthropology to senior students specialized in social work, most of them being young women, what do you think are the most important risks if we would have such a law and we would be bound or forbid, just like back during communist time when we were not supposed to talk about sociology or some disciplines, if we would be bound not to talk about gender studies?
It's quite difficult, if not impossible, to imagine everything I've been doing in the past decades without discussing or touching upon the issue of gender. I mean, I've met with this topic for the first time when I was an MA student, and I can't really imagine my journey here without it. So the risks, well, first of all, it's the risk of any kind of censorship. So it will just shut off a lot of discussions and a lot of possibilities. I mean, nowadays you can't really talk about anything in sociology, in anthropology, in psychology, in all the connected disciplines, in political science, without somehow stumbling upon this issue, and stumbling not only on the concept, but also on the realities behind the concept. So how can we talk about social inequalities in Romania without talking about gender inequalities or economic inequalities or all kinds of issues? How can we talk about politics in Romania without discussing gender inequalities or gender issues? But in the case of Romania, I really think so. I personally think that it's also a matter of confusion on the part of people who think that gender is something else. That's something that I also tried to touch in my presentation. So I think that for people who hear for the first time the word gender in their head, gender means tomorrow morning my child will wake up and will decide that he's not a boy but she's a girl. So that's what scares people and confuses people. And here I think it's also our responsibility and somehow guilt that we didn't really dominate the public discourse, and we didn't explain what gender ideology really means, or what gender issues deal with, and what are the real problems in Romania. Because I don't think that, so I can't imagine speaking to people who are not connected to academia, I cannot imagine that anyone would say that domestic violence is a good thing, or that women should be treated like this, or that feminizing poverty is a good thing. So if you put it like this, people will understand, and you can have like a common ground of actually debating issues. But if you let them get scared by some discourse that they don't completely understand, and then they vote against it because they're afraid, and as we all know, during this COVID period, fear is never a good advisor. So I think manipulating people's fears with all kinds of discourses is really dangerous in both sides, so in both directions. People should be explained, if possible, what are the terms of the discussion, first of all, and then we get to choose if we agree or not with some discourses.
Yeah, ignoring a discourse is obviously a big problem. I mean, people are still there, whether or not we choose to ignore them.
Yeah, we don't like some people, but they still exist, and they vote just like us, and then we are surprised that, wow, where this come from.
Yeah, especially after what happened last week. Yeah. Thank you for that. Michelle, you did a very powerful presentation, and I would like to ask you, what are your next plans? Do you have any type of a new project pertaining to, I mean, I saw this, I assume that your organization has the idea of a jigsaw puzzle or something like that, rejig. I think that would be the correlation I would do. So what is your next big element that you would like to address from an applied anthropologist standpoint?
Well, my boss is Patricia, and the rejig comes, she's an Irish dancer. So the jig is like the national dance of Ireland, you know, the jig. So you can't, this work that we do, you're constantly rejigging, nothing stays static. It's like learning the steps differently every single time. And that's where she got the name for the organization. And she's really an incredible woman, and I've had so much opportunity to grow and learn and develop and apply my skills there. And she really has the mindset, and she drives things forward, but she's really incredibly passionate about education, and she's worked in that field for many years. In FE, she actually brought, she went on a best practice visit to the D school in Stanford 10 years ago, and she brought that here, that way of working. She's since moved out of FE, but we're always working within, we're currently working within an FE project at the minute. We work with the PhD and the earlier stage researchers. We were recently in a secondary school exploring their experiences of COVID. We've been in primary schools in a different organization where we worked. And our drive is to get into education at the lower levels where you can make change, where you can help young people think in different ways and learn in different ways. And that's really the most exciting work that we do. A lot of work, but we're both really passionate about the education, because we see and understand from our own personal experiences within education, and from then working within it, maybe how we're well placed to go in and explore and create ways. And we've done teacher training with the primary schools previously, but really what we're pushing forward now is that the schools work at the minute. But we're lucky, we have, we did some work with the Cybersecurity Centre of Northern Ireland. We're working with ESIT, which is a technology department. CyGrow is one of their projects. So we work in different fields, and everything kind of supplements what we do. And even our personal interests between sports and dancing, podcasts and theatre. I mean, we don't always talk about work. We spend a lot of time talking about interests, actually, because it's our interests and passions which shape how we approach the work that we do. So I must say I'm very lucky to have Patricia, and she's got great networks. She's well established in Belfast, and that really, really helps. She knows the people that we need to go to, whose ear we can get, who can help push our work forward. And that's really a critical component, especially, as I've said, we're a two-woman team essentially, and we bring in collaborators at times, and we've established some really strong collaborators as well, and that helps. So keep your eyes posted for the future education work.
Okay, thank you. We would like to kindly invite you to address questions and comments, not only via chat, but also you can activate your microphones. For example, Petruța Chica Barreto has a comment about your the fear is never a good advisor. This is actually a very, very strong sentence in various contexts that tended to be a problem. Let's give an example with Victor Klemperer's journal regarding 1933 to 1945 during the far-right problems in various countries like Germany or Italy, and so on and so forth. So if you would be so kind, please, you have the floor.
I don't know exactly what to comment, but I was just thinking that homophobia, it's a phobia, it's a fear. So how do you address this fear? Instead of just saying that those people are nuts or we don't want to be anywhere near them, just try to think, how do you approach a homophobe, for instance? How do you find bridges? How do you find ways of dialogue with people? And again, I have the experience of Romania in mind, where, as I've said, I think the gap between categories of people is increasing, and I think that's really scary. And it's scarier than extremes. It's scary that we don't have a common ground anymore.
And more importantly, we tend not to seek a common ground sometimes, which is even more, I mean, we don't have a common ground, okay, but we should try at least to seek it. And sometimes
those hate us, and we just hate each other, but we don't really construct anything.
Yeah.
People who support, for instance, gay marriage hate people who go to church. People who go to church would like to see the others dead, and so on. So it's a lot of hate going around and a lot of hatred, and I don't see any kind of dialogue. I don't see a middle ground. And it's not helping because it has political consequences, as we have literally seen recently.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Lorena, if you like, you can also activate your microphone. Lorena Anton from our university would like to hear more about Alexandra's idea on how empathy should have been more debated during bachelor and masters in anthropology in order to be better prepared for future fieldwork.
Yeah, I activated my microphone. I don't know if...
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Sorry, I could not connect earlier, but I know about the event, and I would be very happy to see the recordings. And I promise to send the questions because it's a very dear subject to me. And congratulations to Mihai and Anna and everybody for this. I was very happy to see Alexandra. Because we know each other from a very long time now. And so my question is related to Alexandra's very insightful comments and presentation about her work and her parcours, her development as, let's say, student and grad student in anthropology, and then a person who worked as, let's say, an anthropologist in applied anthropology work, and afterwards, if I got this correctly, for the big boss. So in a way, for outside the anthropological bosses, or as we were all taught, the academia and well, people like us connected on this network. Alexandra, did you understand my idea? Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very nice to hear you. I can't see you, so but it's very nice to hear you.
Because I'm not in a place that you can see me now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's nice to see you virtually. Yeah. Thank you so much for your question. Yeah, it's actually a very interesting thing that I thought about for a while even after graduating. I think that when people, especially in the BA programs, when people enroll, they are quite young usually, so they are quite fragile. They come with these stereotypes. So I believe that some sort of boundaries in terms of empathy are good. It's good to tell them at first that, you know, you shouldn't really get that involved, especially because at 20 years old, you don't really have the resources or the contacts or the necessary means to actually help, let's say, the people that you interact with. So it's good to start with an observational basis. But I feel like more awareness and more talk on, okay, once you have noticed that these things are happening, there are these NGOs that might help, or there are these institutional resources that might be of help. I think just pushing students towards seeking, let's say, some sort of platforms or some sort of NGOs or institutions that might actually use their researches and you know, create some strategies or plan something and interact with communities that are in need of these kind of actions. I think it would be helpful. So maybe not just you know, keeping them in the academia environment, which is wonderful and very instructional, but most of the times theoretical, and just having them, let's say, collaborate more with these NGOs, maybe facilitating these kind of exchanges or inviting people from NGOs to give talks or to show support, or you know, to maybe have common projects with academics. I think this started actually happening, especially in the last 2-3 years. I've noticed this kind of exchange between different social actors, you know, between NGOs and academia, but it is quite recent, I believe, at least in Bucharest.
But just sorry to interrupt, because I want to understand. So my interest in your presentation was about empathy, and if I got correctly, you were speaking about the need, and you are totally right, about teaching students in anthropology in BA to be more involved as citizens in the public sphere. So not to focus so much on theory and everything. My question on empathy from your presentation, I got this idea that if I quote correctly, sometimes it's very hard to see all people's stories and not to do something afterwards.
Yeah, that's because
so it was on the hard part, my question, not on the how it's hard and how you think you can deal with that as an applied anthropologist.
Well, regarding that, I think it's sometimes empathy is quite necessary in this kind of work. I believe it wouldn't probably happen otherwise, or it would be very dry, maybe. Just pure observation and stating things very scientifically without a kind of personal involvement. So when I said that it is hard, I meant that you know, for me at least, I felt like it was very draining emotionally to gather those stories, because they were sometimes very difficult stories. They were hard lives, you know, things that happened to those people, and it was hard for me to gather those things, to write them down, and then finish and graduate, and feel like it's not enough, like I haven't quite done something with their stories. Like they share this slice of life with you, and then you're you know, you take from them. So I feel like it should be an exchange and give something back to them. So maybe that was my point.
Okay,
I don't know if,
I see it. Yeah, no, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you too.
All right, thank you very much. If other participants have questions or have comments, we would like to strongly encourage you to activate your microphones and address those questions or comments. All of them are important in a way or the other. And I think from my point of view, empathy is also important. For example, in the case when we're teaching applied anthropology to social workers, empathy is actually the subject of 2 disciplines for social workers. And we also talk about the dark side of empathy, the burnout that sometimes happens, because this is also an element that may affect professionals in fields like social work, but sometimes anthropology as well. And that is something that we should definitely ponder and consider. Now, what Michelle was talking, yes, Yanis, please.
I just have some thoughts I want to bring into the discussion, unless there is anyone else who wants to, speak, so that we don't really dominate as speakers.
Yeah, true.
So please give priority to anyone who wants to ask any question.
Yeah, if anyone has a comment or a question, please. If not, I think we will.
Okay, very quickly then. I'm just thinking, having in mind everything we heard today in the presentations and the questions and Alexandra's now contribution, I think one key point in this discussion is the process of teaching. And one thing that we very often, I think, forget when we speak about anthropology is that we have in our mind representations of anthropologists as researchers and not as teachers. And to my knowledge, I doubt there is any specific program for training anthropologists how to teach. So we are supposed to be researchers, but not teachers. So it's one thing understanding and explaining and presenting, and another teaching or trying to facilitate. So I'm thinking and I'm wondering actually how we should and could, those of us who have this kind of structural, and organized teaching as part of our job, to improve this and change this. Listening, for example, to Petruța's example of how do we talk about concepts related to gender, or how do we facilitate, listening to the strategist Michelle mentioned, discussion and the articulation of ideas, and which are, one has to really have a specific interest in how to teach in order to look for ways. There is no organized way, I think. That's one thing I want to bring in. And the other thing that I'm always concerned with is has to do with the degree of intervention we can have in applied way of doing anthropologist. There is a very, in my view at least, very good and very important paper that has been published in 1990 at the journal Current Anthropology by Kirsten Hastrup and Peter Elsass, and the title is Anthropological Advocacy, a Contradiction in Terms, with a question mark. And I wonder to what extent are we facilitating, or are we really directing processes? Because I think that there's always a degree of power asymmetries in the everyday human interaction. So again, a question. Okay, thank you.
We should take into consideration that question, indeed. Now, Lorena was having a comment here. Please stress that we cannot teach empathy, just only how to, one, identify emotions, and two, deal with them as field workers. Yes, but we can talk about empathy, of course, and there are, for example, courses dedicated to therapy via gaming, via playing, better said, or via theater, where empathy is an important element that is discussed, not taught necessarily, but discussed. And we have something like that, for example, in one of our courses. Lian Kwa, I haven't attended the whole meeting, but are there any applied anthropology teachers among the participants or the speakers? I'm curious about the way applied anthropological method and specific skills are taught now. Assuming I'm teaching anthropology, applied anthropology to social workers, for example. Basically, we have a semester course because we have switched to Bologna, I think, back in 2005, which entailed the fact that if before we had about 2 years of anthropology, not only to social workers, but to sociologists, for example, and you were able to do practice in anthropology in sociology, for example, in my university. Nowadays, we have only 1 semester, which is correlated to in their final year, which is correlated generally with their, of course, with their bachelor final paper. So everything is compressed, and you have to do like 7 courses in which you have to teach methods, introduction, methods, theories, and of course, try to do something about practice. So from this point of view, we are a bit, let's have a very elegant expression, we are a bit contracted from that point of view, and this is never a good idea, never a good idea. Another question by Lian Kwa is, do students learn how to introduce themselves on the job market, or how to talk to companies? Now, I think this is an open question for all of us, because, for example, I can give some examples from my faculty of Sociology and Communications experience. However, I'm not able to talk about what happens in other university centers. So I think before attempting to reply to this question, I would invite all of you to comment or try to give an answer to this question, which is actually an important one. If you'd like, of course. So, for example, Petruța, do you in your faculty have any type of events or elements pertaining to this?
Not necessarily from my point of view. I only have one course of political anthropology. I teach in a political science department, and that's all I have in terms of pure anthropology. And I teach other things. I teach methodology, gender studies, political sociology. But our department has such kinds of events where different companies are invited, or different possibilities of employment are shown to students, but not necessarily from the point of view of applied anthropology, but more from the point of view of bridging the market with the educational system.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Yanis?
Well, as I said, we're trying very much to have these things, and we have various events trying to provide skills, trying to invite people to talk about this, and but we don't have a course on applied anthropology. Okay, it's more that we say that we want to involve and have students acquiring skills to do this.
In my experience, for example, applied anthropology was for a long time an optional course, one semester optional course, and we had basically to fight to get it back. And when we got it back, there was a big question whether or not we will retain it. And also regarding, I think your question, Lian, is quite important. Nowadays we have, for example, both at bachelor and masters, and now we have even PhD students. We have events like the students confronting the companies. That is the equivalent of the Romanian translation, which each May you have students from all the faculties that are presenting their projects, and if their projects are interested, they are either patented and then they may gain funding, or they gain funding. Aside from that, our university is granting several type of projects for students. For example, earlier on, there's a bit of a funny story. I almost didn't arrive in time because in parallel, there is another event developed by one of my colleagues, an international event dedicated to communication, and he was in a lab where I should have been. So we have that too. If you would ask me what is the difference between now and, for example, when I was a student 15 years back, the difference is considerable in terms both of possibilities of working in companies like Ina Scheffler, for example, not necessarily as an anthropologist, but we had sociologists and even guys from other universities that did some practice here. But also in terms of going abroad, with various types of grants and scholarships. So even if I would compare what happened 5 years back to what happens now, the differences are quite considerable. Of course, 2020 is a more specific year, but this doesn't mean that intention and direction is not something that we don't take into consideration. Now, how to introduce themselves on the job market. This is something that is not specific only to anthropology. For example, sociologists, in our case, we have a course entitled the Jobs and Occupations Associated with, social worker associated with, sociologist associated with, a specialist in communication associated with, a specialist in digital media, which is one of our newest bachelor degree specialties. And those are generally first year courses, which entail also presentation, not only a presentation, but curricula dedicated to how do you introduce yourselves, not only in relation to companies, but also to other environments. Some students have and are successful podcasters, for example, and are able to gain resources via YouTube or other ways. So that is also a direction that is interesting. Let's not talk only about this. So if you also have other comments or questions, please do address them. Or not. Anna, if you have a question or comment.
To say that our time is kind of up. I know everybody has a lot to do. So maybe let's just wrap it up with a few comments. First of all, we recorded this event, but we will, of course, try to eliminate all personal data from the final recording for the final clip, and it will be available maybe in the next few weeks. Follow the event. We will post a link there when it's ready. And yeah, we will also send a feedback form. And I would really like to ask you to fill it, please. Usually only like 10% of the people that completed the registration form also complete the feedback form, but please try, if you have time, to also complete, so that we yeah, perfect moment. Photobomb by my cat. Yeah, so that we can learn for the future events and be able to organize better and more useful events in the future.
Actually, that was a leitmotif both at the ESA conference, where Dan was famous for his anthrop cat, and afterwards at our Applied Anthropology Network meeting, where again a cat was at some point the star of the action. So, yeah. Well, I would like to thank all of you and thank you for your comments, for your insights. Hopefully we'll be able to do this next year as well. Don't forget that in May, there is the big Applied Anthropology Network meeting in Prague. I would like to thank you, Anna, very much for everything, because I was able to work with you very well. Thank all the speakers, and thank you for your dedication. Thank you, Yanis, and
thank you all.
Thank you. All the best, and I think we would like to wish you a good weekend.
So I think that's a goodbye, and have a nice weekend, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.